It's so nice to see everybody this evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay, great.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now, I think part of the, I'm not positive that I am actually the host of this meeting. It's possible that the shul is. What I think that is going to mean for our purposes is that I am not able to mute and unmute you. So instead, that will be something that you will have to remember to do. So to stay muted when we are in conversation, and then to unmute yourself when you have something to share. What I'm going to do right now is I have a few sources that I would like to share with the group. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to cut it and paste it into the chat box. I think that's probably the best way to do it. And then you can save it, or you can cut it and paste it into a larger document somewhere else. 1 second. Let me just see if this will work. One moment. Sorry for these technical difficulties. You'd think after I had taught on Zoom for the past 8 hours. Okay, it is not transferring over. I think the best bet for us is, can everybody please put your email into the chat, and I'm going to email you the source sheet right now as we're going. I think I have some people's emails that are already.
I assume you want me to send email to you only. Well, to everybody?
You can just, wherever it fits, you can just put it in that chat box, and then I will have it all together, and I'm just going to send you the email right now with the source sheet. All right. All right. And I think I'm just missing one email. There we go. All right. Okay. Thank you for your patience. And you should have all received the source sheet to your emails. And I'm just going to get started. Can everybody just go around quickly and introduce themselves? Let's start
Willie
with
Kantrowitz.
Dr. Mishkin.
And
Willie Kantrowitz. Thank you. Hello. Who else do we have on here?
Hi, Lila. It's Danilo. You got Steph, and a few
Hi.
of the girls are with us as well.
Hello. Great. And who else do we have? Hi.
Mike Schatz. Hi.
Hello. Great. And I think Laura is on as well. So I want to welcome everybody this evening and wish you a happy Lag BaOmer. We're kind of in the last few hours of Lag BaOmer. And in the spirit of the day, I decided to not talk about biomedical ethics in particular today. Last week, we did an introduction to Jewish ethics. We spoke about some of the foundations of Jewish ethics, such that we could build our toolkit for studying Jewish ethics. And there's been some interest and curiosity around medical ethics in particular, specifically relating to COVID-19 potentially. But there's also been some interest. Some people have emailed me and asked if I could teach about ethics begadol. In other words, the big picture of ethics, and Jewish ethics. So I thought for today, because it's Lag BaOmer, I wanted to speak about something that I think is quite current in the world of Jewish ethics. But bioethics and of ethics and bioethics as well. So today what we're going to be speaking about is the ethics of dialogue. And one of the reasons that I wanted to highlight this today is because we know that on Lag BaOmer, one of the things that we are celebrating is we are celebrating the day that the students of Rabbi Akiva stopped dying from a plague. Sounds a bit familiar today. And that one of the reasons that perhaps this plague struck the students was because of their poor behavior, perhaps poor dialogue, the speaking poorly one into the other. And then as a celebration of the end of that devastation, we celebrate Lag BaOmer. Another thing that we celebrate on Lag BaOmer is potentially the Bar Kokhba revolt, as well as Bar Yochai, Shimon Bar Yochai coming out of the cave. And also it's a time, certainly in Israel, where people build bonfires, also symbolizing the light of Torah, maybe even the light of the Kabbalah, of the Zohar that entered people's lives, according to many on this day. And I did want to focus on, I think, one of the most important ethical takeaways from the story of Lag BaOmer, or the origin story of Lag BaOmer, which is how destructive, complicated, and uncompassionate dialogue can be. The other reason that this came to mind in terms of what we were speaking about healthcare is I have found that in my work around medical ethics, specifically pertaining to this complicated moment of COVID-19, I find that a great deal of confusion and disorientation and challenges has arisen simply because of transparency and dialogue. Whether it is transparency and access to research, whether it is the inability for clinicians or academics or scholars or rabbis to have very robust conversation that can lead to good outcomes that can be shared. I have found that there has been both a wonderful working together, but also I've noticed a great deal of fragmentation as well. And so in thinking about that and setting our stage for our study over the next few weeks of Jewish ethics, I wanted to focus on this today. Now, interestingly, the American Psychiatric Association has a list really of objectives or goals or ways to achieve a good open dialogue, to have a dialogue that does not result in a plague of thousands of students, but actually a well set out dialogue. And there are a few points, and I'll read them. It's the first source on the source sheet. Appreciate the value of diversity. Listen to the other side with an open mind. Think before you voice your own opinion. Will you be able to justify it? Keep your cool even when the conversation gets hot. Try to find common good on which you can agree. Don't drag others into the debate and avoid personal insults. Try to keep a sense of humor. Try to change the person's mind, but don't persist if it's not working, and reinforce the positive feelings you have toward each other. I think these are good directions, but of course, in many ways, they're easier said than done. I had an experience at one of the hospitals where I work this morning, where I was really working hard at trying to convince a colleague of mine about a certain outcome for a clinical being experimented with, and we kept getting too set on changing each other's minds. And I realized we really were missing out on so much by spending all of our time trying to change one another's minds, as opposed to give each other a little bit more space to share ideas and to see what could come out of and what could emerge from a diversity of thought. And actually, it's after that conversation and thinking about Lag BaOmer that I wanted to bring some of these sources to you today. And the first source is from Masechet Eruvin, the tractate of Eruvin. And I decided to put all of the sources in English just in the name of accessibility to all, and I will read it out loud. Rabbi Abba said in the name of Shmuel, for 3 years the house of Hillel and the house of Shammai argued. One said, the halacha, the Jewish law, or the way of life, is like us. And the other said, the halacha is like us. A heavenly voice spoke. These and these are the words of the living God. Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim. And the halacha is like the house of Hillel. Okay. A question was raised. Since the heavenly voice, the Bakol, declared both these and those are the words of the living God, why was the halacha established to follow the opinion of Hillel? It is because the students of Hillel were kind and generous and gracious. They taught their own ideas as well as the ideas from the students of Shammai. Not only for this reason, but they went so far as to teach Shammai's opinions first. Like that which we taught, one whose head is and the majority of his body are in the sukkah and his table and in the adjacent house. Beit Hillel said it is invalid, and Beit Shammai said it's invalid, and Beit Hillel said it's valid. Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, is there not a story in our hands that the elders of Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel went to visit Rabbi Yochanan and they found him sitting with his head and the majority of his body in the sukkah and his table in the house? Doesn't this imply it's permissible? Beit Shammai said back to them, from there you bring a proof? Even they said to him that if this is how you act, you never fulfilled the mitzvah of Sukkah in your life. The story is to teach that whoever degrades himself, God raises him, and whoever raises himself, God degrades him. Whoever runs toward greatness, greatness flees from him, and whoever flees from greatness, greatness runs to him. Whoever uses his time wisely, the time stretches out, and whoever procrastinates, the time stands still. So what do we learn from this? What are some of the takeaways that come up here if we're talking about the idea of dialogue and productive dialogue, and if we're looking at the American Psychiatric Association's list of how to have productive dialogue? Why does this bat call, why does this heavenly voice say, yes, on one hand, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chayim, these and these are words of the living God, but we hold according to Beit Hillel. Why Beit Hillel? Any ideas? So
So I think
interestingly,
the one thing that
yep, thank you.
is one of the things you want to do is to give yourself, in just thinking about a debate or a discussion, if you can actually explain where the other person's coming from, then it actually makes your argument generally stronger. So it's not necessarily answering your question, but I think that as part of being able to support your opinion, you need to be able to understand what the other people's opinion are, and then maybe there's a slight difference between the two of them, and therefore not trying to say like in marriage, both of you can be right, but the concept is that if you know what the counter argument is, it makes your argument stronger.
Yes, absolutely. And I think
But
that gave a good example also of also how personal conversations, even maybe heightened emotional conversations are happening between two people in a family. This can also reflect that. Somebody else began to share.
on the other hand, Beit Hillel doesn't prevail because they have the better argument. They prevail because the bat kol says so. So,
Right.
I sharpens the argument isn't quite right, and I don't think that's really what the Gemara is getting at, because, right, it mentions that they were careful to listen to the respect the opinion of Beit Shammai, and therefore, even though in a certain sense perhaps both of them can be right, although that's an interesting argument among the Rishonim of what these and these are the words of the living God mean, but I think the bat kol is telling you that because they behave better, we rule in accordance with them.
Right. So the bat kol, the heavenly voice, is saying specifically, why do we listen? Why do we hold by Hillel? I think yes, because as Daniel said, they are factoring in, they are listening to the other side. That's explicit here, but they are listening to the other side, but also because of humility, because they have the humility, and that's certainly something that I heard in Daniel's statement. They had the humility not only to be kind and gracious, that they stuck to their own ideas, they taught their own ideals, but they also went so far as to teach Shammai's opinions first. So there's humility, there's listening, there's saying, and yes, you're right, there's a long conversation about the question of these and what constitutes the these and these. But I do think that the takeaway here is humility. And the humility here that is why I think the bat kol distinguishes and holds by Hillel, also highlights the ways in which when there's a diversity of opinion and when you create room for hearing another side, there is merit to this. And actually something that is holy and sacred to this as well. And I do want to continue because I think some of what both of you are saying will be amplified in the next sugya, Yevamot. The next source reads, although Beit Hillel prohibit and Beit Shammai permit particulars of levirate marriage, and although these disqualify these women and those deem them fit, Beit Shammai did not refrain from marrying women from Beit Hillel, nor did Beit Hillel refrain from marrying Beit Shammai. Furthermore, with regard to all of the disputes concerning the laws of ritual purity and impurity, where these rule that an article is ritually pure and those rule it ritually impure, they did not refrain from handling ritually pure objects, each with the other, as Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel frequently used each other's vessels. Why did I bring this down? What does this show about this relationship between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, even though the bat kol elevates Beit Hillel and holds by Beit Hillel? Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai lived together in community. So what does this demonstrate here in Yevamot?
That they didn't make it personal.
Right. Exactly.
Right. That they were arguing about matters of principle, but they didn't allow it to degenerate into a personal dispute. Right,
Exactly.
and I think Rashi in the Gemara in Yevamot says, if a woman from Beit Hillel who, or Beit Shammai who said, I'm not permitted to you, would just say so. If they were proposed a shidduch, the other one wouldn't accept it, right? They didn't try to hide up and say, well, I'm going to impose my opinion on you. They both showed a certain amount of forbearance.
Right. Exactly. They showed a certain amount of forbearance. They respected one the other. They didn't make it personal. In other words, they said, okay, I hold this way, you hold that way. And we respect each other so deeply that we will even marry one another. In other words, our families can blend. There's a pluralism here that is so extraordinary in these two different camps. And I think this is actually a beautiful way of thinking of dialogue, and also a beautiful way of thinking of community. Were we only to be able to live our Jewish lives this way? I think about the ways in which there's such fragmentation in the Jewish community among different denominations of Judaism, even within denominations of Judaism. But here we have a situation where the two communities marry each other. They build families together. And it's because of this idea of respect, but also the concept that it is not, in fact, making it personal in terms of these disagreements. I wanted to bring another source here that is an unusual source. I'm not sure if any of you have heard of this rabbi and thinker, Marc Alain. Has anybody heard of this? He's a French rabbi and philosopher. I'm not sure, and whose father, I believe, is a grand rabbi in France as well. And he writes he wrote an interesting book dedicated to his father, who was a rabbi and a philosopher, called The Burnt Book. And he writes as follows. The Talmud says of Talmudic discussions, the words of one and the words of the other are the living words of God. This statement should be seen as conditional. If there are words of one and words of the other, then they are words of the living God, and as a result are living words. The role of the machloket is, machloket being disagreement, is to undermine satisfaction, to undermine knowledge where thought is always shown as true to type. What do you think about that? What do you think about that verse, that statement? What's being brought up here that we haven't touched on yet before in terms of argumentation and disagreement? So something that's coming up now is the idea of, first of all, of machloket, of disagreement or argumentation, but also a word that has that starts to be introduced here are concepts of what is conditional, and also the idea that the role of machloket is to undermine satisfaction, to undermine knowledge where thought is always shown as true to type. So the word true here is an interesting one. I've been noticing a lot with my students that there's a real curiosity or holding on to concepts of truth more and more. Many of my students have been saying things to me. I don't know if you've heard this saying, I'm speaking my truth. This has been a very common expression. And it's always irked me a little bit, because to me, truth is either provable in a lab. I spend a fair bit of my time in the sciences, or maybe truth is true to my experience. But I'm concerned always about the word truth as it is presented here. And some of you who know me know that I'm doing some writing now and research now on ideas around authenticity, uncertainty, truth, specifically in the world of ethics. And where this intersects with my curiosity and interest in studying Jewish studies, I have found myself on very foreign territory. And that foreign territory for me is the study of Chassidut. I did not come from a Hasidic background in any way. I came from the strictest, most rigid Misnagdish background. I never studied Chassidut, and my late father, who was my greatest teacher, never in my entire memory shared even a hint towards studies around Hasidism. And yet, a couple of weeks ago, I was going through some old boxes, and I came across my late father's high school yearbook from Hebrew Academy of Montreal. And each graduate wrote a quote. And the quote that my father wrote in his high school yearbook was a quote by Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, the Kotzker Rebbe. And it said, everything in the world can be imitated except for truth that is imitated is no longer truth. A pretty interesting text. And I, of course, was completely shocked that my father, who was so committedly anti-Hasidic, quoted the Kotzker Rebbe, who had some, I guess, of the Hasidim, is kind of Chassid light in certain ways, but nonetheless. And so I wanted to bring down a piece from Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, speaking about this idea of truth, because truth, of course, is at the foundation of most areas of conflict and dialogue. And of course, even the word machloket itself, if we think about Hebrew as a three-letter root system, what is the root of the Hebrew word machloket? Does anybody know?
Chet Lamed Kuf.
Right, and what does that mean?
Multiple meanings: to divide or to smooth.
Right, divide or to smooth. In other words, even the root of the word machloket is innately divided, but it can also be, what did you say? What was the second one you said?
Smooth.
Yeah. So when I think of smoothing something out, that comes to resolution. So we have, even in that one complicated word of machloket, we have that which is divided and that which can be smoothed over and come to a certain type of resolution. But usually at the base and at the foundation of conflict is a search for or a desire to amplify or elevate the truth. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzk says as follows: what is the advantage of casting aside truth? And this is talking about an argument in Bereshit, in Genesis, a midrash about the creation of humans. What is the advantage of casting aside truth while peace remained, which also argued that they not be created, people. Yet when we cast aside truth, peace will prevail. The root of argument is that everyone fights for their own truth, but when we push truth aside, there is no longer something about which to dispute. Thus, there is no argument, and peace has no claim to make. So really highlighting here that truth is at the root of conflict, and that once you put truth aside, there is nothing by which to dispute. Michael, did you have something to say? Okay.
No, I just a side comment, not as great as the class.
Got it. Thank you. Thank you. Sorry about that. And so here we have this idea of truth being at the foundation. And I'm always curious about this issue of truth, and especially this concept of how people define truth, empirical truth, objective truths, proofs. And I found this beautiful statement by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs in his book, The Dignity of Difference. I'm not sure if you've read it, but it's an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Truth on earth is not, nor can be, the whole truth. It is limited, not comprehensive, particular, not universal. When two propositions conflict, it is not necessarily because one is true and the other is false. It may be, and often is, that each represents a different perspective on reality, an alternative way of structuring order, no more and no less commensurable than a Shakespearean sonnet, a Michelangelo painting, a Schubert sonata. In heaven, there is truth. On earth, there are truths. Therefore, each culture has something to contribute. Each person knows something no one else knows. The sages said, who is wise? Ezehu chacham, one who learns from all men. The wisest is not one who knows himself wiser than others. He is one who knows all men have some share of the truth and is willing to learn from them. For none of us knows all the truth, and each of us knows some of it. So here we have a circumstance where Rabbi Sachs is defining truth differently. He's not defining truth as something that is provable. He is defining truth as something that is experiential, that is felt by the individual and thus shared. And the benefit is in a multiplicity of people sharing their truths, by which he means sharing their experience, to create what he calls a beautiful culture. And it's with this plurality and diversity of perspectives that we create this beautiful world where we can learn from each other and where we can actually accomplish something that is very sought after: wisdom. That true wisdom comes from diversity and a truth that is based on sharing of one's experiences, because people have their own individual experiences which speak to their own truths in some sense. What do you think about this? And what do you think about his mention of Shakespeare, Michelangelo, and Schubert? Why do you think he brings those examples from the arts up in his definition of truth? Any ideas?
I think it's probably because he wants to give different angles. We all come from our own experiences.
Exactly.
And potentially trying to be as worldly as possible.
Exactly. And I think that one of the things that made me think about was also that, yes, everybody looks at or experiences the arts differently, but also individuals experience art differently throughout their lives. So I can remember, I'm a lover of poetry. And I have a memory of reading certain poems as a child, or being read to as a child, certain poems, and then rereading them as a young adult and then as an adult. And they might mean something totally different to me in different moments in time. I can hear music or read literature that will mean something totally different to me over the span of my life. Maybe even in the same day, I can hear or experience an artistic moment differently. So it sheds light on the ways in which I might listen to Schubert and hear it one way. Danielle might listen to Schubert and hear it in a totally different way. And I myself might experience that same Schubert piece differently, even in one day, in one moment. I want to bring us to another text, which I think is really important in terms of dialogue, in terms of seeking out the truth, in terms of the plurality, the pluralism of truth, and also the ways in which we have dialogue, and that's the Likutei Maharan. And I'd like to read it to you and then to hear what your thoughts are. Know this, that disagreement, machloket, is analogous to the creation of the world, which consisted of creating an empty space, as we have shown. For were it not so, everything would be infinitely divine. The halacha, the Kabbalistic category of the Ein Sof, infinite. And there would be no space left for the world. Therefore, God contracted the light to the sides, and an empty space was left in which the world would be created. This always reminds me of the Leonard Cohen song, "There's a crack in everything, that's where the light gets in." And an empty space was left in which the world could be created with all its time and spatial dimensions, all done by the act of speech. As it is written, by the word of God were the heavens made, in Tehillim, so too is the case with disagreement. For if all the scholars were united, there would be no creation of the world. It is only when there is disagreement between them and they divide, and each draws to one side, a space is created between them, which is analogous to the space and to the contraction of the lights, by which the world was created by the act of speech. As we have shown, all the arguments they each use are only in order to allow the world to be created by them, just as God created the heaven and the earth with words, so too can the scholars. I love this concept that this empty space that was established by pushing the lights one to the other side created the space for Briata Olam, created the space for the creation of the world. And so too, if there are arguments and there is that separation, there creates this empty space in the middle for something to emerge, for some creativity. Through constructive dialogue, through constructive argumentation, through machloket, this empty space becomes filled with ideas, filled with potential, filled with the possibilities. Nobody wants to live in an echo chamber. People who are working in innovation, invention, would not be able to be particularly productive if, of course, they just worked within a community that just agreed with them all the time. You need to be in a situation to be productive, to be challenged, and to create that space for healthy, respectful argumentation that can bring about a certain type of productivity that can be likened to creating an entire world. And it's painful at times. I know for me, when I do any academic writing, I feel so protective of it. I feel that it is my blood and toil and sweat has gone into creating this paper. And if I give it to a peer to do peer review, they completely destroy it. They mark it up and they challenge me on every single point, but they always make it better. It's always better. I remember when I was a kid and even into adulthood, I would send every single one of my papers to my father to correct. And he would mark up the whole paper with red pen. And at the very end, he would write, Tov, good, which I really knew to mean, you better rework this entire thing. But of course, he filled that space. He filled every blank space on that page with machloket. He challenged the points. And then from that, a more robust outcome came about. I want to focus just for the last few minutes that we have here on something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and this idea of ethics relating to dialogue and how this isn't obvious. Even with Divrei Elokim Chaim, Elu ve'elu, even with these teachings here that many of you might have read before, I'm struck by the ways in which I need to learn and relearn this lesson on how to have constructive dialogue over and over again, time and time again. It is certainly not obvious, it's not easy, and it's a skill I think that needs to be built over time. But I was thinking this morning about the way we start every one of our days. We start every one of our days with Shacharit, and specifically with the Braita of Rabbi Yishmael, and in the introduction to the Sifra. Every morning in Shacharit, what do we read? We read that Rabbi Yishmael says, through 13 rules is the Torah elucidated. Rabbi Yishmael gives 13 examples, 13 rules, essentially, about how to have discussion and how to have arguments and how to have dialogue in a thorough way, in a way that is respectful, also just methodology of how to study, how to learn, how to have conversation, how to discuss, how to really elucidate from a context a certain passage. And in the last of the points, number 13, we read as follows: similarly, two passages that contradict one another until a third passage comes to reconcile them. In other words, also not being so rigid to have two people in conversation with the other, sometimes you need a third person to come in and mediate. I think that there is something so profound about the way in which we start every Jewish day with the Braita of Rabbi Yishmael. We start every Jewish day with learning and relearning how to have conversation, how to study, how to understand Torah, how to navigate and negotiate this methodology, and how to make sense of our world and how to make sense of our world with one another. And I do believe that the reason that it is in Shacharit every morning is because it's not obvious, it's difficult, and we need to learn it and relearn it and be reminded of it every day that we start, every day as we start our day, so that we can be reminded of how to have these conversations and these dialogues. We can be reminded of how we can conduct ourselves in this world where we're met with many challenges and many struggles when it comes to people that we might agree with, that we might disagree with, or ideas that we might agree with and we might disagree with. It's my hope that as we do that, as we say that tefillah, as we say that, as we read that Braita every morning, that we use it to really guide us, such that we can have more meaningful, productive, respectful relationships that are all in the name of creating a holy community, a respectful community, and a community of chesed, of love and kindness. We have about 5 more minutes before we have to end, and I'd love to have any questions or comments or curiosities. Okay. The rabbi asked me to end a little bit early because of Mincha. I think the YIB Zoom Mincha is starting shortly. Thank you so very much for being here this evening. And next week we'll be speaking about themes in bioethics, specifically relating to COVID. And I look forward to seeing you then and wish you a good week. Shavua Tov. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.